Welcome to the next episode of our podcast on negotiation. And today we have a very special guest, Valérie Rosoux, who is a professor at Catholic University of Louvain and scientific director of Belgian Fund, no, research director of Belgian Fund for Scientific Research. Yes, I hope I got it right. Yes. And teaches negotiation. And our topic will be reconciliation. My name is Remy Smolinski, and welcome to the podcast on negotiation. Valerie, great to have you with us. Thank you for your time. Why don't
Thank you for having me, Remy.
Why don't you say a few words about yourself, Valerie?
All right. So, as you said, I'm based at the University of Louvain, FNRS, so a lot of freedom in my research, since I can teach, but I'm not obliged to teach. And therefore, I chose to teach international negotiation, which is really kind of a passion. And I also teach in Louvain transitional justice, and I try to create bridges between the two fields. So the field of post-war context, transitional justice, post-mass atrocities situations, settings, and this question of negotiation. How do we negotiate reconciliation if we can? That's a little bit the starting point.
And speaking of starting point, it's always good to start in an academic context. At least it's always good to start with a definition. So I guess we all have a feeling of what reconciliation is. Yeah. But if you were to put it, if you were to dress it with your nice words, yeah, how would you define reconciliation? And could you give us a few examples from historical examples where it worked really, really well and maybe where it didn't?
Yeah. If I may, I think that I could even start with a kind of a research posture and almost a kind of dilemma that I had myself as a scholar. So I was sent to the Great Lakes in Africa, Rwanda, especially 20 years ago. So right after the genocide, even earlier, and I was really struck by a kind of paradox in the field. That was that on the one hand, when I was meeting with policymakers in Belgium or in Kigali, or practitioners, NGO workers, or also scholars in my field, to them, reconciliation was really an obvious goal. I mean, it was like kind of evident objective, right? And on the other hand, most victims who I met with felt literally bitter towards the notion. And so my question was, okay, what can I do? What shall I do with these two attitudes? So the same phenomenon is seen as obvious for the ones and indecent for the others. And so initially, the posture that I adopted was really the easiest one. I decided not to mention reconciliation in my research, even though I was working on it. But I talked about the Franco-German rapprochement, the Franco-Algerian, relationship. But I tried to avoid the notion because I was not at ease. Then I got a call from William Jartman to tell me, okay, could you write a chapter for the conflict, conflict resolution handbook, Routledge? I don't remember even Sage. I don't even remember what. Anyway, my mission was to write a chapter on reconciliation. I could not escape anymore. And but that was really interesting, because then while I was doing this research, I realized how complex it was, how useful this umbrella and fuzzy concept was as well, and the scope and the limits of it. So that's a little bit the starting point, I would say. But otherwise, if you ask me what it is or what are we talking about when we talk about reconciliation, there is no consensus in the literature or in the practice. For some, the core element of reconciliation is trust, and it makes sense. For others, it is truth. It also makes sense. And another group focuses on an identity change. And so the point is really to differentiate the potential meanings and to be aware that some people talk about it from this perspective to other people who talk about that from another perspective, and there you have big misunderstandings. I don't want to be too long, but I can explain more if you want.
Yes, I found when I was reading a little bit in preparation for a talk,
Yeah.
I read a little bit about reconciliation as a process of mutual accommodation. Right, mutual accommodation meaning, hey, you are different, I am different, I have a different vision of what is truth. Yeah, I have my own feelings, which might be hurt, right? And you might have your own, right? But to coexist, to live peacefully in a particular setting, be it a shared flat or a territory, right? We make a step towards each other. Yeah? That's kind of a definition which which kind of liked, but I also disliked it at the same time. Yes, what is I liked it because what does accommodation mean? Helping each other, making adjustments, making the change, right? But at the same time, I was thinking, but doesn't it mean that we accept that we are less right than we had thought? So what are your thoughts on reconciliation as a sort of a mutual accommodation or a mutual adjustment change process?
Yeah, I fully understand your point, Remy. And personally, I would be inclined to be a bit like you on a continuum. So maybe we can consider a kind of continuum between a maximalist approach and a minimalist approach. And what you explained, if I'm not wrong, what I heard is really that if you consider reconciliation as a process of mutual accommodation, it's almost a synonymous of reconciliation as a synonymous of conflict management. Basically, we coexist. Okay, we still have a kind of hatred, but we are not going to kill you anymore, vice versa, because it's not in our interest, and that's it. You have your view, right? So very minimalist approach, but which is already remarkable after a mass atrocity, event history. However, if we go on the other side of the continuum, we have a maximalist approach. I hope you are following my kind of blackboard here, an imaginary blackboard. And here, reconciliation is seen as a transcendent process, kind of, far beyond this accommodation and coexistence, because the argument of these maximalist voices, I'm not one of them, but I do respect them, but their argument is really that the coexistence stuff, right, the accommodation perspective is too explosive. I mean, it's not enough in order to prevent the reoccurrence of violence. And so they push a little bit further. Why is it interesting to see this continuum? Because my point is not to say these are wrong and we are right, for instance. That's really not my I don't have normative, I hope not to have a normative approach like this, but at least that we as scholars or as practitioners at different times of my life, we have to be aware of the position that we adopt. Where are we on this continuum? Because it implies a particular kind of objective for the association, for the people you work with, and so on. And also it implies different kind of expectations towards the victims. If you accept that people still, simply need to coexist, which is already difficult, you let them with their memories, okay? You let them with their visions. If you want to go to a reconciliation, which means a kind of harmony, right? Full trust, full forgiveness, full justice, and a kind of miracle, you need to have people working on their memories and sharing one vision, which is not only challenging, but might be violent. You see what I mean?
Yes, but is it, Valerie, I like this vision a lot. Is it achievable within a particular generation, or is it, do we need more time for it to kick in? In other words, is it possible to change these hurt feelings, towards the other side, who is obviously utterly wrong, who did us harm, within the same generation? Or do we need offsprings who just have to see that, hey, we had difficulties in the past, but let's start on a clean slate. Let's start this relationship anew. What's your feeling? What is your experience of reconciliation processes?
Mm-hmm. And we are already, I would say, at the core of the topic, actually, with this question. Thank you for being so right to the point. This is really the most important variable for me, timing. I mean, and this is very, very difficult to deal with that from a practice perspective. To me, after a war, we don't count in years, but in generations, which is absolutely terrible in terms of concrete management, because NGOs, for instance, they have when everything is very good, a 3 years contract, right? For policymakers, they think in terms of, an election time, maybe 5 years maximum. So they need to pack everything in order to deliver something. And well, even the Franco-German case, which is to me one of the most remarkable one, which is not a fairy tale either, right? I'm not euphoric, but I'm not cynical either. So I can see some remarkable achievements. Even in this case, in my personal family, it took 2 generations, but it happened. I mean, a change did happen. And so my grandfather, for different reasons, too long to explain, couldn't stand the idea that a German tourist, because he was selling ice creams in a provincial town, he could not stand the idea that a German tourist could come to serve him. So he would disappear slowly with respect, but he was not able to deal with that. 2 generations. I didn't know when I was a teenager that I would work on that. So I mean, in a normal family, not specifically political, 2 generations afterwards, my first boyfriend was, of course, a German one. You see what I mean? So it happened, and I'm not the only one. I mean, it's for an entire continent almost. 2 generations were necessary, but this case had all the required conditions, which is extremely rare. Maybe we'll go to the conditions afterwards, but
yes, absolutely. So let's, since you've mentioned them already, yes, what are the preconditions for a successful reconciliation process?
Yeah, I don't pretend that I'm complete and exhaustive here, right? Because it's quite spontaneous, but I would see at least maybe 4 conditions that to me are critical, and the order might be different according to each context. But the first thing to me is the context. So from a very realist perspective, changes of emotions, representations, and beliefs are so demanding for people that people get involved in that only if they see, they feel, they perceive that the change is vital, indispensable, in their direct interest. You see what I mean? And so if I take a concrete example, in the Franco-German case, I mean, it was not a kind of a moral, purely altruistic, rapprochement.
Sure.
People present it this way, but no. For the first time, in France and in Germany, the enemy was not the other side anymore. I mean, it was not on the other side of the Rhine, if you want.
Right.
They had a common new enemy, much more dangerous, USSR. Okay, so first the context, the necessity to move on with the other. Second, I think that leadership is critical here. I don't pretend that people can make the difference. I mean, if they are alone without any kind of contextual variable, but the fact that de Gaulle and Adenauer, or Mandela and Tutu, and these kind of leaders, they were not perfect, but legitimate and credible in the eyes of all parties. So this is critical. So context, people in the sense of leadership. I would also maybe mention, in order to have a sustainable process, knowing that it takes a long time, it's important, this sustainability. I would say that robust institutions. Jean Monnet said once, nothing lasts without institutions. So nothing changes without people, fine, but nothing lasts without institutions. And so robust institutions to trigger a real change at all levels of society, you need a place that doesn't depend only on de Gaulle, Adenauer, Tutu, and Mandela, a place that will stay like the European Union, if you want.
Yes.
And the last element, but we already touched upon it, is to me timing. So the fact that people don't start or don't try to start a process at any time. So it could be too early, right? If 3 months after the genocide, some Belgian NGO workers or Belgian prime minister arrives in Kigali and say, you should reconcile now, I mean, it's nonsense. So not at any time and not at any pace. Very long process.
Thank you, Valerie. This ties into a question that we've received in our chat. Umit is asking, good to see you, Professor. Can you give us some details about reconciliation efforts for the protracted conflicts such as Turks and Armenians? So we would probably have to go through all of these success factors and analyze it in the context of an ongoing conflict. But is timing the most important one in terms of in terms of this? Maybe leadership and institutions in that sequence?
So well, we can go. It would be very quick to go through the list. Let's make the exercise together, because I didn't prepare the question, so it might be tricky. As far as I know, even though I'm not a specialist, but this case is really kind of emblematic case. So I read a lot, but I never really made a kind of specific field work. However, the context is reconciliation on the agenda for political reasons. I would say not really, unfortunately, for people who depend on that to unfold. But I think that if it was the case, it would have been done, I mean, a long time ago. So there are people, I don't know whether it's on both sides, but at least on one side, who benefit from the non-reconciliatory, situation, or who, anyway. So to me, it's not on the agenda until all sides feel that they are in a kind of mutually hurting stalemate. To come back to the concept of Zartman in the negotiation, I think it's still relevant in the reconciliation process. Regarding leadership, do we have leaders on both sides who are legitimate and credible in the eyes of everybody? I'm not sure. Not at all so far. Institutions, there is no institution. They try to negotiate, but it's too early, right? But it's normal. I mean, it comes afterwards. And the question of timing, that's terrible, because if we consider that it's been a century now, more than a century actually, since the event, what is terrible? Why do I use this word terrible? Because when I meet some friends here from Armenian, affiliation, I have the feeling that it was yesterday. In terms of emotions, everything is so intense, intact. And so the lesson that I would draw up or emphasize from this case, I don't know whether it resonates with the gentleman who raised the question, is that official denial, has a kind of freezing effect on everything. So 1 century, the fact that so many years passed doesn't change anything in terms of emotions are still burning, explosive. I mean, it's not only active wounds, it's festering wounds. It separates. Terrible.
Thank you, Valerie, for answering this spontaneous question. When we put it into perspective, right, in terms of the sequence of events, right? Yeah. We know from our European painful past, there was one conflict, festering wounds, another conflict, then end of the conflict, negotiation, and a painful reconciliation process with leaders, with institutions, and so on. Yeah? Is that the normative sequence of events, which means can reconciliation only start once we've negotiated or mediated a an alignment of preferences or peace treaty or whatever else, yeah? Or can or should reconciliation start sooner and be a prerequisite for a successful negotiation? Yeah? Is there a do you have a feeling on the right or normative sequence of events in that case?
Yeah, you have great questions. Thank you, Ravi. But because it allows really to go to the core of the issue of the topic. I would say I would not personally adopt a normative approach, saying that, okay, in all cases, it should be like this, because it would be a kind of checklist approach, which is what policymakers expect and demand. Sometimes I was invited in Rwanda by a minister, and he said, but don't say all the time that it has to be nuanced. And so give me a clear, checklist of what should we do. It's not going to work. From the Franco-German case to the Rwandan case, I cannot give you a checklist. I can. You will be happy for 5 minutes, but it won't work, and it will hurt. It will harm. Anyway, so I wouldn't say that it's, let's say, a kind of reconciliation could be seen either as a precondition to a fruitful negotiation process in the long run, or that reconciliation comes afterwards as a kind of outcome of a long negotiation process. So what comes first? I would say it's not the one or the other, either or. It can be both. So we have cases. I remember I edited a book with Mark Anstey. I don't know whether he is with us today, but if he's there, I would like to quote him. Is important to me. So Mark is a practitioner, a South African practitioner involved in the transition in South Africa. And we had this discussion together because my point was, Mark, it's impossible to have reconciliation as a kind of precondition, because my argument is that it takes generations, right? And he said, but Valerie, in South Africa, it was the case. Without this reconciliatory intent, they would not have been able to imagine this negotiation process. So the conclusion was, okay, according to the leadership, the context, the sensibilities, the culture can be a precondition or a kind of, I would say, horizon. To me, it's not even an outcome. It's a process with a kind of, in French, I would say, un cap. You have a horizon in sight, right? And you take this direction, because outcome, it's a never-ending process. To me, it's never irreversible, even between France and Germany.
Thank you so much for answering this, Valerie. Very insightful. Dr. Schiff, Amira Schiff, is asking a question about culture. So thank you for the interesting talk. You are very welcome. Thank you for being with us. What about cultural dimension in the reconciliation? For instance, do some cultures, religions have never forgiveness, or have it easier to forgive, or less easier to forgive than others? What's your view on culture as a dimension or factor in the reconciliation processes, Valerie?
It's a superb question, a very complex one. Thank you for raising it. I would say, once again, culture, it's another fuzzy concept. Okay, what do we talk about when we talk about culture? Wow, it's another, you need a series of talks on that. But if I try to summarize my thoughts, I would say that if you take the religious part of culture, which was included in the question, I would say, yes, there are big, major differences according to the cultures. And for instance, the use of forgiveness in the reconciliation mantra from a maximalist perspective. I don't know whether the audience was there when I did that, but the maximalist perspective, some voices counter-argued in saying, well, stop with this forgiveness, which is so Christian, in substance. It doesn't make sense for us. However, so I would say that there are processes that go beyond culture. And just before the talk, we were talking, Remy and myself, preceding a little bit the discussion. And I said, to me, there are commonalities beyond cultures, One of them is that in all the cases that I worked on so far, that I've been working on so far, I noticed the importance of the existence of a humiliation feeling somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And in all the cases, and it triggers for generations sometimes, toxic vibrations. It was the concept that we developed together. Anyway, and I would maybe go further than the religious part of culture to address the question and say, the most important point to me regarding culture is memory, which is different. If we consider social memory or collective memory, call it or national memory, call it like you, whatever. I mean, as you want. To me, this big weight of the past is a major dimension to prevent a kind of healthy reconciliation process, or easy. But there is no easy reconciliation process after mass atrocities anyway. But it's an important dimension for sure. There is a literature on this, and I could send to Remy some papers on this for the person.
For sharing with the audience. Yes, thank you so much for answering this one, for taking this one. You've mentioned the intensity to which with which the topic of reconciliation has been dealt with in science. We also exchanged some thoughts on it right before we went on air. And there's so much attention devoted to negotiation, mediation, ways of resolving or managing conflicts. Yeah, there is some literature on reconciliation, but it's a minute share with as compared to the other parts. Yeah, why do we so much focus on resolving conflict, and we tend to believe that that once we got to an agreement, it's all over, mission completed, we can tap ourselves on the shoulders, hey, we are such great negotiators, without and do not care so much about the feelings that have been hurt, damaged, the humiliation that you mentioned, right, that was felt or caused. Yeah, why are we so much focusing on the process towards the agreement resolution and forget or do not focus so much on what follows afterwards?
Well, in my own research, the feeling I have is that we need reconciliation for us. For instance, I take a concrete case as a Belgian scholar, as a Belgian citizen. I mean, it would be so wonderful to know that in Rwanda, they turn the page and everything is fine because we are involved in that, okay, as third parties. And so I don't mean that all the persons who try to favor reconciliation efforts in the field are, in bad faith. So it's extremely, I'm full of admiration towards them. But what I mean is that if we arrive with a kind of expectation, which is like Hillary Clinton, she emphasized a lot the idea that, okay, we are going to work with people everywhere she went to. In Congo, she said that, in Asia as well, she said, I summarize a little bit her idea. The people we need, okay, are people who look forward, because otherwise we're not going to reach the goal that we have. And I fully understand that backward looking is probably not a great attitude. However, saying we need good victims, right? Resilient victims, forgiving victims, forward-looking victims. Oh, when you talk to people in the field, you know what they say? We already live with them. Valerie, I remember one Rwandan woman, she said that to me. Because she was left alone practically in her village. And she said, I already live with them. Don't ask me more. Don't ask me too much. And I also remember someone else. She was she's a Colombian survivor, so completely different. I was in Paris interviewing her, and we were talking about these topics. And suddenly she stopped and she said to me, don't touch upon my hatred. That's all I have. They took all I had. Okay. And that was a turning point in my research. Because if you take a look at the conflict resolution dictionaries or handbooks or, academic or whatever, courses, hatred is always a kind of negative emotion compared to forgiveness, reconciliation, positive aspects. I mean, I don't buy this anymore. Emotions are ambivalent, neither to me, I might be wrong, of course, neither positive nor negative. They are. People feel hatred. Okay, let's do work with the people the way they are, full of hatred, which is quite legitimate after what they've been, through. And if we arrive with the idea that you should reconcile now and, quickly, to me, it's a terrible additional violence.
Thank you, Valerie. We have another one, which is also refers to an overt conflict at the EU borders, Ukraine and Russian invasion of Ukraine. Where should they start? By stopping war, probably, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. But to me, reconciliation is not on the agenda. There is nothing to talk about now. Maybe another anecdote. 1 month or even before that, after the starting of the war, I've been contacted by a Norwegian colleague and a Belgian friend in Brussels, and both wanted to organize it pure coincidence, kind of concert in Norway and in Brussels, different settings, with the same ideas. Let's demonstrate that they can reconcile, and we are going to find Ukrainian and Russian musicians in an orchestra, and we will, all the benefits of the concert would go to, I don't know, generosity associations and so on. And I said, guys, you are doing that for you. I mean, who really wants, among at least the Ukrainian musicians around you, who really feel that they need to be in an orchestra right now to play with a big smile, something from Mozart or Handel? I thought, this is for us. Do you do that for them or for us? That was really, to me, simply not the right question. I don't mean that there is nothing to do now to prepare a reconciliation process or a kind of rapprochement. And there are niches. So Russian dissidents abroad are in contact with Ukrainians. There are niches of kind of visionary people who already, think and see beyond the conflict. But it's extremely rare. And I would not like to blame the people who don't want to think about that. You see, you just stop. I mean, I don't care about a rapprochement now. I want justice. I want to see where the bodies of my friends are.
Right. Yes. So the answer is, who are we doing it for, right? And what are the priorities of those involved? What are versus ours? And let's take care about the victims, those involved first, before we start doing something for ourselves.
Yeah, because otherwise there is a temptation to do something which is very gratifying, and it might be a temptation for mediators to play the gratifying role, actually, the hero that saves every. I don't mean that there is no heroes like that, but it might be highly problematic if the price to pay to adopt this posture is paid by the people in the field.
Yeah, exactly. Valerie, thank you so much for sharing this. My last question is always about the great negotiators. So, knowing what you've shared and much more about reconciliation, conflict management, and negotiation, who are your role models, contemporary, historical? Who are great negotiators that you would pick in our chat?
At least one. It's not very original, but anyway, that's authentic. That's my answer. I think that Charles de Gaulle did a great job. Actually, he has a lot of shortcomings. He was not perfect for sure, but what is really impressive in this guy to me is a kind of pragmatic character, which is like cadet called textbook case. And if you take a look at what he wrote regarding the Franco-German relations from World War I to the end of World War II, it was very harsh. I mean, he was mentioning a kind of ontological incompatibility between the two people, you know, a kind of hereditary enemy. I mean, very, very hard vocabulary. And the same Charles de Gaulle, at the end of the 50s, wrote in his letters, books, and speeches, the natural cooperation between the two people and the what's the name, the deep affinity that has always attracted both sides. Was it only a kind of, you know, opportunistic guy? No, I don't think so. But he was, you know, smart enough to understand that there was no other option than, I mean, dramatically change the view. And what they did in terms of negotiation with Adenauer for the Traité de l'Élysée, it's 1963, sorry, in January, is impressive because their negotiation process dealt with official levels. Still now, ministers from different departments have to sit down and negotiate every 2 other months. It's still in action now. But it was not only official, it was also the establishment of the Franco-German Youth Office, OFAGE. And this office allowed more than 8 million student exchange programs. So very, you know, civil society level. And both, that's quite rare. I cannot be long, but I would have many other arguments to tell you that this guy really made a complete shift in terms, a kind of conversion.
We're very fortunate in Europe to have lots of role models as for great negotiators. Valerie, thank you so much for your time. It's been great having you. And for the audience, I must confess, very rarely have I dealt with so wise and modest and humble individuals as you, Valerie, are.
Oh,
so thank you
you
much.
made my
Thank you
day,
very much
Remy.
with your wisdom. And to the audience, thank you so much for your questions. Enjoyed it a lot. And until next time, all the best in your negotiations. Thank you, Valerie.
Ciao. Ciao. See you soon.